everybody, and welcome to the Penelope Possum channel. With me, your hostess, Penelope the Possum. And today, for Spooky Scary Saturday, we're going to be watching some Dr. Bob videos. As always, the links to each video will be in the description, and let's go. We've got a few videos by the good doctor. SCP-610, The Flesh That Hates. SCP-3153, I Want to Be Your Friend. SCP-914, The Clockworks, which I know a little bit about already. SCP-001, When Day Breaks, another one I know a little bit about. One moment. Oop. It's mildly terrifying. I'll have to change the
The agent hides under the table as three nightmarish warped legs stop wet.
Just a moment. Hello. We're just copying down all the links to the videos so that I can put them in the description and put them wherever else I think people might look. These are all new videos we haven't watched yet from Dr. Bob. He's posted a lot since the last time we watched. We've been pretty busy reading creepypastas and whatnot. Oh goodness.
agent hides under the table as three nightmarish, warped legs stop wetly past him, all belonging to the same creature. A creature that had once been a human being. Each step makes a moist,
yes,
slapping
all hail
sound on
Dr.
the tiled
Bob.
floor of the laboratory. The lights went out long ago.
Dr. Bob is the best doctor.
Back when the facility was first compromised, his eyes have adjusted, though seeing some of those things make him wish they hadn't. He ponders how many of those monsters are wandering the hallways, lurking in dark rooms.
Is it just me, or do these creatures look very tumorous?
But he can't think about that right now. All he can try to do is remember how many shots he fired earlier. Does his Sig Sauer sidearm still have 6 bullets in the magazine?
Does that look like a Sig? Maybe? It's hard to tell when it's a more like, Dr. Bob's art is, you know, pretty detailed for an animation channel. That is to say, other animation channels have far less detail than this. But, you know, it's hard when you're looking at a drawing of something. Specifically, like, something like a gun, I think, to figure out what it might be.
Only 3. In a high-stakes situation like this, those numbers matter. As the monster passes out of his range of vision, still hunting, he sees a drooping, fleshy limb drag along the floor behind it. He counts himself lucky that the scar tissue has already grown over the creature's eyes. He can't seem to smell him either. This might be his chance to escape. With the practiced dexterity of his physical training,
There's a lot
he
of
slides
loud
out from
people
underneath
yelling
the table
outside,
and
and I don't
assesses his
know why.
environment. There's only one of those things in here. It's stomping across the other side of the room, mercifully cast in shadow. He doesn't want to count the limbs. He just wants to get out of here and complete the mission, collect his prize. But as he turns to creep out, another headache strikes him. It hits with such force that his jaw locks up, and it takes everything in him not to scream. Instead, he squeezes the grip of his Sig Sauer and prays for salvation. He needs to get out of here. He needs to survive. As though the universe is answering his prayer, the headache subsides as quickly as it came on. He breathes a silent sigh of
I don't trust that headache. I think that headache is a sign of bad things to come. Oh
relief
dear.
and takes a step forward onto a discarded glass test tube.
Oh no.
Crunch. The creature jerks towards him, looking with what might have once been its face. He's been spotted. He knows it. All hell is about to break loose. To most, this mission would have been a nightmare. But if you can believe it, the agent had enthusiastically volunteered. This job will either destroy his life or save it. Flashback a month. It didn't begin in a compromised Foundation containment site. It didn't begin in the briefing room or the helicopter en route. It started in a doctor's office, where a promising young agent of the SCP Foundation receives an awful diagnosis. Stage 4 cancer, an inoperable brain tumor, indicated by headaches, disordered thought, and mild seizures.
That's what I was worried about. Well, actually, I was more worried about whatever affected the other people was affecting him somehow, but yikes.
And by their most optimistic estimations, he doesn't have north of a year to live. All the monsters and maniacs he's encountered in the field, and it's some faulty genetics that sentences him to death. What a sick joke. And the punchline? He's got a pregnant wife he's about to widow, and an unborn child who's going to grow up fatherless. They throw him a condolences party at Site 19. The site director comforts him with the fact that his hefty Foundation life insurance policy will still apply if he dies of natural causes, so his family will be taken care of. He's as grateful as he can.
That's nice at least, but it'd been, you know, nicer to see his wife and kid and all that. Thank you. Goodness, this is a depressing one we start
under the
on.
Circumstances, but none of it dulls the low ache that stays with him every moment of every day. The inexorable fact. He's going to die, and there's nothing he can do about it. Or is there? A few weeks after his diagnosis, he's once again called into the office by his site director. They've got a special mission, one befitting of someone in his circumstances, a dedicated and loyal dead man walking. They've received intelligence from a Foundation research facility in the Nevada desert where things have gone foobar.
Nevada.
A few days earlier, they intercepted a distress signal, something about an anomalous pathogen breaking loose during an experiment, but the person sending the signal didn't live long enough to specify what anomaly they were dealing with. Figures. But there had been no further contact from the site since the first transmission, so they had every reason to believe that the site was essentially lost. The agent asks his superior if it's an extraction mission. The site director solemnly shakes his head, commenting that anyone still left in that site is better off dead by now. No, this mission is of a different nature entirely. The agent needs to get in there, manually activate the site's emergency nuclear warhead, and escape the detonation zone before the site and the 15 square miles around it are reduced to irradiated rubble. This isn't a mission. It's a death wish. He's ready to reject it. His time is already short. He doesn't want to spend the remainder of it dying in a plague-ridden hellhole. But that's when the site director makes his offer. I'm willing to make a special exception here, Agent. Because of your condition and the highly sensitive nature of this assignment, I'm going to give you one-time access to a unique incentive structure. If you're able to complete this mission as directed, I'll give you a dose of SCP-500. That gets the agent's attention. SCP-500, also known as the Panacea, is a small pill bottle containing anomalous medicine capable of curing anything. Literally anything.
Wow.
From rabies to smallpox to the common cold to, well, an inoperable brain tumor. It's a simple decision now. The agent has to say yes. Flash forward to the belly of the RAH-66 Comanche stealth helicopter, where the agent is being given his loadout by the handler en route.
See, this is what I'd like to call an insurance policy. This guy knows damn well this man is probably not gonna come back.
To the clandestine site.
It is very
He's given
unlikely
a 6-hour
this man will
P320
live.
Nitron compact handgun with a few magazines worth.
I'm sorry, a what?
He's given a 6-hour P320 Nitron compact handgun with a few magazines.
A Sig Sauer P390 Nitron.
That is a P226.
How can you tell?
Because the P320 doesn't have a hammer.
By Jove.
Worth of ammo, some light body armor, and a Dracarys Gen 12 12-gauge shotgun with Dragon's Breath incendiary rounds. The handler assures him that whatever is in there, it doesn't like fire. Though he should only engage in combat as an emergency measure. If he was exposed to the pathogen that ravaged the base, his superiors would consider him lost and send someone else to do the job. Comforting to know, the agent thinks. It takes them a couple hours to reach the site. It's cordoned off by electric fences, looking to the untrained eye like an abandoned chemical plant. Neither he nor anybody else could even guess at the horrors waiting for him inside. Not long after, he rappels down from the helicopter onto the roof of the facility and finds an appropriate entry point, a ceiling hatch he's able to pry open with a utility knife. There's only darkness below. He is glad that they also gave him a small flashlight as he carefully lowers himself down into the hall. There's no turning back
Hallway
here.
of nightmares.
Either he'll earn back his life or lose it. The agent is methodical, gripping tight his Dracarys and maintaining situational awareness as he works deeper into the building. He studied the schematics given to him by the site director. He knows the layout about as well as his own childhood home. The manual activation panel for the on-site nuclear warhead was in the basement, so he'd need to work his way down. Things seemed normal enough at first, aside from the pervasive air of tension, the fear that there might be some horror lurking around every corner. He's sweating now, but not just because he's worried. It's baking hot in there, like someone had cranked the thermostat up to maximum. There was no power for the lights, but they were still blasting the heater? As he gets deeper into the building, he notices that the very structure of the facility is changing. The walls of some rooms have a strange, fleshy texture. Vein-like structures slither across the ceilings.
Ew.
Desks, lamps, and computers are covered
Ew.
in red raw pustules. It looks
Ew.
like the very rooms around him are afflicted with a malignant cancer. He imagines that the inside of his brain doesn't look much different. Does whatever pathogen they unleashed in here even affect the building? This must be why they want to blow the whole place sky high. His musing
Okay.
is interrupted by a pained whimper down one of the darkened hallways. He instinctually raises his flashlight and sees a limping human figure advancing down the hall towards him.
Help me, please.
He looks sicker
dude,
than
I
any
don't
man
think
the
there's
agent
any
has ever seen.
help.
He's dressed in the familiar lab coat of a Foundation researcher, but his face and hands have been struck down by the most revolting rashes the agent
I do not think there's any helping that guy. I
has
think
ever seen.
the only thing that
His
could help
skin
him
looks
is
like
a
giant,
swift and
livid
merciful
scab
death.
with pinprick orifices for his eyes and mouth. He's wheezing. The agent imagines the inside of his lungs look even worse.
Please. You've got to get me out of here.
Without warning, the infected man lunges forward, trying to close the distance between himself and the agent. He's fast, but the agent is faster. He raises his Dracaris and unleashes a dragon's breath round into the sick man's chest, igniting him. He drops to the ground, screaming and spasming, but without a moment's hesitation, the agent fires off
Oh yeah,
another
he's
round
most
into
likely
his head.
done for.
The infected researcher dies. But that's when the real screaming starts. Alerted by the sound of the shotgun blasts, heavy footsteps erupt all around the facility, fleshy and irregular, visceral. They're all zeroing in on the agent's location, and he needs to move fast if he wants any hope of getting out of here alive.
This
and
is
getting his cure.
horrifying.
He finds the nearest stairwell, kicks open the door, and starts descending, jumping 3 steps at a time. There's a cacophony of awful sounds from the flights above him, but he can't stop and think about that. There is only the mission. But the inhabitants of the site have other ideas. An awful red shape bursts out of a doorway on the flight below him, freezing the agent in place with sheer horror. It looks like the vague memory of a person fused with the dumpster behind a butcher's shop. So many limbs, arms, legs, tentacles, claws, faces. A fever dream incarnate. Of course, the agent wastes no time in giving it hell. He raises his
It
Dracaris
looks like-
and unleashes several dragon's breath blasts.
Okay, this is gonna sound completely unhinged, but the head of that creature almost looks like an AI rendered image of a heart. Like, you gave a machine or an alien a vague description of a heart, and that's what they came up with.
Blasts, lighting up the
It's the
stairwell in
head of that
brilliant magnesium flashes and causing the monster to scream in horror. But this thing isn't like the researcher. It has the power to fight back. A flaming tendril shoots forward and wraps around the shotgun, dragging the weapon out of the agent's hand before he can react. In the moment of clarity brought on by the shock, he hears that the monsters behind him have caught up. A
Oh,
legion of
Jesus.
horribles, things that had once been human in various stages of horrid mutation. Red guts and dripping pus abound. He pulls the Sig Sauer from his holster and opens fire into the crowd, hoping to buy himself some time. There's a fire exit next to him, and he had something far worse than fire hot on his heels. The agent bursts through the door and runs as fast as he possibly can, with the victims of the anomalous pathogen trailing quickly behind him. They don't seem smart, but there's enough of them that their intelligence doesn't matter. He doesn't have the ammo to kill them all, no matter
It's like zombies. It's like a zombie virus. It's freaky.
how you slice it. He needs to lose them, then get to the nuke. He finds his way into a lab to wait out the chase. We find ourselves coming full circle, back to the start of our tale. The agent, in his attempt to escape, has stepped on a test tube and alerted one of his mutant pursuers to his presence. And in case you were wondering, he did only have 3 bullets left in the Sig. The monster lets out an ear-piercing shriek that's sure to alert all the others and makes a sudden dash towards the agent. He unloads the remaining few rounds into the monster's center mass and sprints towards the door, pulling on the fire alarm on the way out. In that instant, the alarm starts blaring all across the building, sending another spike of pain through his tumor-infested head. But at least it'll make it harder for the blind among the monsters to detect him by sound. Short-term pain for
Terrifying.
long-term gain. He busts a nearby glass box with his elbow and yanks out the fire axe within. It's his only line of defense now. Remembering the schematics in his mind, he runs for his life, using the axe to ward off the shrieking, once human beasts as best he can.
Ugh.
Floor by floor, he descends towards the basement, never fully losing the pursuers. He runs through hall after hall, door after door, until he reaches the secure bulkhead for the basement control room.
He's not gonna
and
make
punches
it,
in the
is he?
code. Soon, he's standing before a vast control panel and remembers exactly the sequence he needs to activate the on-site nuclear warhead. The agent puts in the code exactly as he was told, and as he does so, he becomes absently aware of a strange itching sensation on his arm. He turns and sees with horror that one of the creatures had clawed through his suit, leaving a red rash against his skin. He'd been infected. But that didn't matter. If he could activate the nuke and head back, the SCP-500 pill would cure his brain tumor and this mysterious pathogen. All he needed to do was complete his mission. Then he'd... With the push of a button, the lights across the facility switch on and start flashing red. A voice over the intercom crows that the on-site nuclear warhead has been activated and that the entire facility would be entering lockdown in the lead up to the explosion. Lockdown? And that's when it hits him. He was never meant to come home. He'd been given a false promise and sent on a mission with no hope. He'd just be one more person counted among the sick and the dead.
I knew it. I knew he was dead from the moment he agreed, because they wouldn't willingly give out the panacea to anybody. They just said that they'd give it to him to make him do something that they knew was just going to end up killing him.
When the bomb went off, it was so beautifully cruel. He can't help but laugh to himself. He figures when push comes to shove, there's only ever one cure for a disease like this. Boom. The human body can be a terrifying concept. You don't know if the thing that will one day kill you is already lurking deep within your flesh. Whether it's a misfolded protein in your brain that will one day become a deadly prion disease, the clogged blood vessel that might someday make itself known as a heart attack or a brain aneurysm, or perhaps the tiny error in cell division that could manifest as any number of cancers. But compared to SCP-610, codenamed the Flesh That Hates, these are all about as severe as a case of chickenpox. SCP-610 is one of the most virulent and deadly anomalous pathogens the SCP Foundation has ever encountered, capable of causing extreme and dangerous physiological changes to its victims. These effects begin with rashes, itching, lesions, and increased sensitivity of the skin, slowly but surely increasing in severity hour by hour as the disease progresses. Within 3 hours of initial infection, blemishes resembling scar tissue will appear across the chests, backs, and torsos of the victims, expanding to their limbs and extremities over the next hour or so. No victim of SCP-610 has ever survived beyond 5 hours. In high-temperature environments, the infection rate is even faster, with the shortest time to date from infection to full conversion being only a handful of minutes. Once full infection is attained, all vital signs will cease for 3 minutes. At this point, the body's advanced scar tissue will take on a life of its own, with vital signs being reported at 3 to 4 times the rate of non-anomalous humans. But they won't appear human for long after that. The mutations continue to advance, becoming considerably more severe. Fleshy limbs will extend, multiply, and split. Their body may warp. Their head may shift or elongate. In some extreme cases, infectees have become static and started to grow out into their environment, covering the surrounding area in tumorous masses, making it more hospitable for fellow victims of the flesh that hates. Highly risky Foundation observation has shown us that the disease seems perfectly designed to propagate itself. In the early stages, when the original infected human is still alive, it will seek out aid from others, hoping for a reprieve from its condition, increasing infection risk. In later stages, the creatures that were once human will aggressively pursue any uninfected people who enter their sensory range. Skin-to-skin contact is the most common vector of infection, but infection via the respiratory system is even more rapid and dangerous. The anomaly is believed to be connected to one of the more...
Notice he was sent in. He was sent in without any kind of respiratory protection
More
as
dangerous
well.
groups of interest the SCP Foundation are aware of. An ancient fringe religious
Damn.
organization known
They
as
really
the
did
Sarkissists.
just-
These loosely affiliated cults worship flesh, disease, and corruption in all its forms, and some of
Yeah.
the
They really sent bro on a freaking suicide mission.
nastier anomalies
Just
related
cover
to
their own
so-called
tracks.
body horror and disease can be attributed to their rituals. However, given their inclinations, it's highly unlikely that even if a connection could be proven, a Sarkissist would give up any information that might lead to the SCP Foundation synthesizing some kind of treatment or cure for SCP-610, even if the Foundation resorted to torture. In fact, knowing the Sarkissists' unconventional views on pain and suffering, they might even enjoy it. Initial reports of the flesh that hates were not actually
Yeah,
produced by
it
the
does suck
SCP
to be
Foundation,
him.
but the Russian government. After reports of an unusual number of disappearances in the area around Lake Baikal in southern Siberia. It's a rural area, and multiple alarm bells went off when the farmers were sending in reports of neighboring farms being abandoned, their inhabitants unaccounted for. Local police were dispatched to look into the matter. They never came back. Regional police were sent out to locate the missing local police. They disappeared too. When members of the Federal Security Service were sent in, and they failed to report back, it became clear that something out of the ordinary was going on. The
Yeah,
Foundation were
maybe.
quick to cordon off the affected areas where people infected by SCP-610 had converged into pseudo-communities. Remote robots and drones are permitted to enter these areas for observation, but aren't permitted to leave to reduce the risk of the infection spreading. Due
Makes
to both the
sense.
highly contagious nature of the virus and the highly aggressive behavior of those infected, this anomaly has been given the Keter class and a severe containment mandate to match. Because of the size of the affected areas, isolation and quarantine have been deemed the most viable containment options. If any infected creatures make their way towards the perimeter of the quarantine zone, the accepted procedure is to pepper them with small arms fire until immobile before destroying the body with incendiary weapons or long-range explosive munitions. Even getting close to the creatures is considered too great a risk to be acceptable. Anyone infected is to be considered lost. They'll be euthanized and incinerated. Anyone within a 3-meter range of one of the infected needs to be quarantined for several hours to ensure that they haven't become a vector. Scorched Earth policies are the standard operating procedure for SCP-610. You may think that this is cruel on the Foundation's part, but it's a policy you'll agree with when you consider that the alternative is hearing a fleshy tendril slithering against your window tonight. If ever SCP-610 breached containment and reached a densely populated area, it wouldn't be long before human beings ceased to be the dominant force on this planet. As I said earlier, the human body can be a terrifying thing, and anomalies like SCP-610 can exploit this primal terror of the self, this bestial burden we all share, because it reminds us of the most frightening and universal fact about our bodies. They won't always be ours. Check out the Dr. Bob Patreon and become a junior researcher today. Now go and watch another entry from the files of Dr. Bob.
Oh, God,
like
Dr. Bob, what are you
SCP-5056, The Constant Companions. When the man left his home for a walk in the park this afternoon,
I mean, I'm sure Dr. Bob will be fine. He's gotten into worse situations at the end of the videos, yeah? Dr. Bob's an anomaly into himself, like... He wouldn't be the first anomalous doctor in the SCP Foundation, for sure. He'd be one of many, but he's certainly a unique case of an anomaly.
I never guessed that he would encounter a monster. But now here he is, standing face to face with the most terrifying thing he has ever seen. He heard it before he saw it, the sound of dozens of legs skittering across the ground, growing closer and closer until the thing crept into view. At first,
What?
he doesn't believe what he sees. It looks like a centipede, but it's so much bigger. Like something out of a monster movie from the 50s. Attack of the 5-foot centipede. But he won't stick around to let this thing attack him. He turns and makes a break for it, running as fast as he
Centipedes
can.
are
until
gross,
his chest begins
millipedes
to
are
burn
better.
from the effort. He stops, panting, and curses himself for not going for runs.
He's eaten and drank some pretty janky things. He'll be fine. Yeah, he'll be fine. Plus, I've seen him interacting and even befriending certain very dangerous anomalies, so yeah, he'll be fine. He'll walk it off. Don't forget, his office is canonically at the top of the stairs that kill you. So he can go up and down the stairs that kill you or accelerate your time. Perfectly fine. So he has some kind of temporal anomaly at the very most.
More
or at
often,
the very least.
But hopefully, he's managed to elude the creature. He turns around
Millipedes are
and
better.
all the color drains from his face. There it is, right behind him. He shouts at it, waving his arms, trying to scare it off, but it just keeps coming. Okay, he didn't want to try this, but there's only one thing to do with a bug that won't leave you alone, even a giant one. He lifts his foot, and as the huge centipede approaches, he stomps on it. There's a crunching sound as his foot breaks through the carapace. Then, a sickening splat.
Yeah, he'll rub some dirt in it.
Feels a brief surge of guilt for stomping on the thing. After all, he's usually the type to carry spiders outside rather than squish them. But desperate times call for desperate measures. He wipes his foot off on the grass and continues toward home.
That's not
Every
gonna
so
end
often
well
on his
for
walk
him.
back, he thinks he hears that sickening skittering sound. But every time he turns to look, there's nothing there. Whatever freaky mutant bug he encountered in the park, it's dead. Or at least it's far too wounded to follow him home. What is he thinking? Even if it wasn't hurt, bugs can't track people, and they don't hold grudges. At least, he hopes they don't, as he swallows the anxious lump in his throat. Once he's back at home, he's able to put all thoughts of the nightmare encounter in the park out of his mind. He orders a pizza for dinner as a bit of a special treat, watches a bit of TV, and heads to bed. It's a little stuffy in the room tonight, and the air conditioning is busted, so he leaves his window open to cool the room down.
And that was your last mistake. You're about to get visited by a gigantic centipede. I don't like centipedes very much. No, sir. I don't think they're very cool. I like millipedes.
It's a safe neighborhood.
So...
He's done it before. He settles in for bed and doesn't give the wide-open window a second thought, never once considering what might come crawling through. When he wakes up the next morning, the bed feels different somehow. It takes him a moment to register the sensation, but as his eyes slowly flutter open, he realizes what has changed. There's someone in bed with him. No, not someone. Something. He yanks back the covers to reveal the giant centipede curled up in bed beside him. His stomach roils, and he tastes acid in the back of his throat. How did it...
Yeah, I would
the
too.
window. It came in through the window. But how did it find him? And more importantly, why doesn't it even look injured? The creature stirs, antenna twirling, and it turns to look at him. It takes a moment to stretch as if it too is waking up, and it begins to crawl toward him. All rational thought abandons the man, leaving him with nothing but fight or flight.
That is the perfect time to wet your pants and run the fuck away.
He
In that
chooses the
order.
latter, but not before grabbing the lamp off of his bedside table and throwing it at the thing. Hopefully that's enough to slow it down. He grabs his phone and runs out the front door,
Other
not
than
even
being
stopping to put on
huge,
shoes or lock the front door.
Millipede, or the
Thankfully,
centipede
the
hasn't done
centipede
anything.
doesn't chase after him, at least as far as he can tell. His legs collapse beneath him, and he sinks to his knees in his yard, heart still racing from the shock. With shaking hands, he searches for information on a nearby exterminator and makes the call. He'll pay
Really?
whatever the exterminator wants. He'll cover the rate if that's what it takes.
Hi, Dale.
Whatever gets him here as soon as humanly possible. 15 minutes later, the pest control truck pulls into his driveway, and an exterminator steps out. The man isn't sure how to explain his problem exactly, so he settles on centipede infestation. This guy's a professional. Surely he's seen something like this before, if anyone has ever seen anything like this before. The man watches from the sidewalk as the exterminator...
Maybe a paleontologist would be a better pick for somebody who's seen a giant centipede before, yeah?
opens the front door, stepping inside.
That looks like
As he
Daniel
does, he
Gribble.
lets out a high-pitched scream. Then, suddenly, he topples backward, landing hard on the ground. On top of him is the centipede. It swarms over him, holding him down. The man watches helplessly for a moment before springing into action. He rushes to the garage and grabs a shovel before coming to the aid of the exterminator. Summoning all his strength, he slams the shovel into the centipede, sending it flying off of its intended victim. He doesn't stop there. He hits the centipede with the shovel again and again and again until it stops moving. Then he extends a hand to the exterminator, helping him up. Now, he explains, the exterminator sees the sort of problem he's been dealing with. He asks the exterminator if he can help, but he says nothing in response. Instead, the exterminator simply turns, ashen-faced, and walks back to his truck. He climbs inside, starts the engine, and floors it out of the neighborhood, driving as fast as the truck will go. The man is alone again with this bug he can't seem to squash. He turns back to assess the carcass of the centipede, and his jaw drops at what he sees next. The carapace is rebuilding itself, closing up the holes and refilling the dents left by the shovel. Legs bent out of place straighten out again, back where they belong. The goo that he assumed was the bug's innards is absorbed back into its body, and as he watches, it rolls over and rights itself again, then comes crawling toward him. As it reaches him, it stops and rears back, lifting the front of its body off the ground. The shovel is useless to defend himself. He knows that now. Instead, he freezes, staring at the monster before him, waiting for it to strike. But it doesn't. It just looks at him for a long while, before extending one of its legs toward him in a deliberate gesture. It almost looks like, and this makes no sense, the thing is asking for a handshake. Slowly, tentatively, with utter disbelief, the man extends his hand and grasps the spindly little appendage. Using its entire body to move the leg, the centipede lifts the man's hand up and then pushes it down. He laughs at this, a sudden barking sound that surprises both him and the centipede. But he can't help it. It's all so absurd. He just shook hands with a bug. But as bizarre as the situation is, he also feels a wave of relief wash over him. Whatever this thing is, and it definitely is no ordinary bug, it doesn't seem like it wants to hurt him. So, unsure of what to do other than give in to the absurdity of the moment, the man walks back into his house with the centipede right on his heels. He shuts the door behind them and turns to his uninvited house guest. So, you like TV? Its antennae wave curiously, and it appears to be waiting for a response. He picks up the remote and switches on the television. Then, on the weirdest Sunday of his life, he and the giant centipede watch some TV together. He eats a few pieces of leftover pizza and, not wanting to be rude, offers a slice to the centipede. Much to his surprise, the bug takes the slice in its mandibles and promptly eats it. That night, the man puts down some newspaper on his floor to give the centipede a place to sleep, but the bug insists on crawling into his bed again instead. At first, he protests, but he has to admit it's kind of nice to have some company, even if it's a bit unconventional.
I mean, other than just being a centipede, it hasn't really done anything wrong?
He always wanted a dog, but his allergies made it impossible. So maybe, in a weird way, this is the next best thing? When he wakes up, the centipede is gone. He scans the room, looking for any signs of it, but he can't see anything. He calls out for it, and hears the skittering of legs approaching the room. When the centipede enters, he notices it's carrying something. The TV remote. It crawls up onto the bed and drops the remote into his
like
lap,
a dog.
like a little dog delivering the paper to its owner. Unsure of what else to do, he gives the centipede a gentle pat on its back. Hey, thanks, bud. The centipede continues bringing him little gifts in the morning, such as the TV remote, his phone, and his glasses. And once it even brings him some mail that was slipped through the slat in the door. As the days progress, and he grows more used to his many-legged friend, he notices some changes in its appearance and behavior. It's getting smarter, responding to verbal commands in a way it couldn't before. It's figured out how to open doors, how to turn on the TV by itself, and which channels the man likes best. There are some downsides to keeping the critter around. It insists on eating a serving of whatever he's having for any given meal, and working from home is difficult with the risk of the thing scuttling through the background of a video call. But otherwise, he's starting to get used to this new addition to the household. Even when the centipede develops what he can only describe as thumbs along some of its front legs, appendages it can use to grab items and interact with the world more like a person, he isn't disturbed. Nothing surprises him anymore. The only time he is truly shocked by the centipede's changes is the day it speaks its first words. One morning, he hears a creaky little high-pitched voice say,
TV time.
It shouldn't be possible, but it's the centipede speaking to him. He can't see a mouth that might produce the words, but somehow the thing has figured out how to talk. Its vocabulary continues to grow, and it picks up words and phrases that the man uses on a regular basis. The thing is becoming less like a pet and more like a friend, a little buddy that wants to be just like him in as many ways as it can. He comes up with a new nickname for the centipede, Junior. It takes to the name immediately, responding when called and always running to answer. As the two grow closer, they pass the days together with a simple routine. Wake up, have breakfast together, work from home while keeping it a secret as best you can, dinner and evening TV, and bed before they do it all again the next day.
That
It's
sounds
not a
like a
bad little
nice.
life, though he knows it would look horrifying to an uninformed outsider. The man becomes so accustomed to his new routine and his new companion that he almost forgets about the exterminator who is scared off by the centipede.
Oh no.
But
Wait, no. The exterminator. Junior.
when his doorbell rings and he opens it to find two strange men waiting on his doorstep with a clipboard full of questions about giant bugs, he remembers. As it turns out, the exterminator quickly spread the word about his terrifying encounter, and his story caught the attention of an organization that specializes in, to use their words, the cataloging of previously undiscovered flora and fauna. Much to his dismay, the men take Junior away from him, but they promise that he may be able to come and visit once they've determined it's safe. They take Junior to the nearest SCP Foundation site and give it a new name, SCP-3153. SCP-3153 refers to a series of arthropods that superficially resemble the Scolopendra polymorpha species of centipedes native to northwestern Oregon. These creatures measure approximately 1.76 meters in length, and they weigh an average of 82 kilograms.
Ooh,
I don't mean to
chunky
disrespect
boys.
these creatures, but that is a great deal larger than any centipede I am comfortable being in the presence of. Beneath the surface of their chitinous carapace, SCP-3153 instances are made from a mass of something similar to totipotent stem cells, though they act at a much faster rate. The function of these cells is to form new organs, limbs, and tissues depending on how much SCP-3153 instances interact with and form emotional bonds with human subjects. These adaptations appear to be an attempt by SCP-3153 instances to mimic and please whichever human they are bonding with. Upon initial contact with a human that it is interested in, an instance of SCP-3153 will operate with sophisticated animal intelligence. It will use this intelligence to attempt to be useful to its chosen human. Some of its behaviors at this stage include bringing small objects to the human subject that they will need in the morning, such as their toothbrush or eyeglasses. They have also been known to swarm over a perceived intruder to the subject's home in an attempt to protect them from harm. During this phase, they will also begin to mimic the human subject by eating the same foods as them or nesting on their bed like a dog or cat might. If this attention has not been reciprocated, and if the human attempts to harm the instance, it will display an impressive ability to regenerate from almost any physical harm. Even if they are attacked by their chosen human, SCP-3153 instances will never fight back. They are docile, forgiving, and persistent in their pursuit of a bond. The instance will continue to bring items to the subject, nest nearby, and otherwise try to ingratiate itself to them, until the human speaks to the instance in a friendly manner, leaves it an offering of food, or otherwise expresses the reciprocation of the bond. During this period, SCP-3153 instances will shed human-adjacent biological tissue from its massive stem-like cells. Though these blobs of tissue are unpleasant to stumble on, or step on in the middle of the night on the way to the bathroom, they are usually completely harmless and are just part of the instance's preparation for its inevitable adaptation. As SCP-3153 instances spend more time with a human subject, they gradually develop the ability to recognize human facial expressions and discern their meaning. They become more affectionate at this stage and will often attempt to stand upright and give their favorite human a hug, which is either adorable or a bit terrifying depending on your perspective. I myself land somewhere in the middle. SCP-3153 instances will generally remain close to their human at all times, attempting to keep them safe from any possible harm. During this stage of bonding, they develop a greater understanding of language and technology, as well as the necessary anatomical adaptations to use them, such as hands with thumbs, mouths capable of speech, and vocal folds that produce a speaking voice. The adaptations only continue from here, as the SCP-3153 instance attempts to become more and more like their favorite human. However, as much as they might try, the instance will not be capable of accurately replicating the form or behavior of a human. The result is either an endearingly bumbling attempt, or what some have described as smack dab in the middle of the uncanny valley. But the process doesn't stop there. Remember the shedding, the unpleasant blobs of organic tissue all over the place. The shedding increases at this point, and can cause quite a mess if it is not attended to. Luckily, SCP-3153 instances are good listeners, and 92% of them will follow directions if they are told to reduce their shedding. Some of them get a bit too creative with this prompt and attempt to reshape their shed material into something edible, which they then present to their human as gifts. If the human refuses these gifts, the SCP-3153 instance will become incredibly sad and will retreat from socialization for a period after due to its hurt feelings.
Oh no!
When the Foundation first discovered SCP-3153, there were concerns amongst the researchers that the anomalous creatures produce mind-affecting anomalies. After all, they could think of no other explanation for the deep bonds that have formed between several instances and their chosen humans. But a closer examination revealed no such mind-altering effects. As it turns out, the humans that have bonded with SCP-3153 instances see them as pets, just as a human might bond to any other pet. Yes, these pets are giant.
See, that's the funny thing about people, and you'll see this multiple instances throughout all of human history, even to today. Humans will bond with anything. Like Roombas, a perfect example. They don't think, they don't act intelligently, but a lot of people see Roombas as pets.
Giant centipedes with slight shape-shifting capabilities, but companionship is companionship when push comes to shove. So far, according to Foundation records, 68% of human subjects have successfully bonded with their SCP-3153 instances, resulting in a 21% increase in overall productivity. This morale boost was so notable that one SCP Foundation researcher proposed the potential use of SCP-3153 for therapeutic purposes in the paper Humane Pests and Pestilent Humans, on the emergence of non-conventional friendships between Homo sapiens and anomalous arthropods. I found it to be quite a persuasive piece of writing. I recommend giving it a read if you can find it. You may not have the security clearance, though. SCP-3153 is kept in an artificial containment habitat for centipedes at Site 64 in Forest Park, Portland, Oregon. The interior of the habitat is decorated to resemble a non-specific major metropolitan area, complete with visual and audio props meant to perpetuate the illusion and convince SCP-3153 instances that they are living in the outside world. This includes concrete, as well as speakers that play the ambient sounds of traffic in accordance with a standard rush hour schedule. In addition to the ordinary care required by non-anomalous centipedes, SCP-3153 instances are to be provided with weekly social interaction sessions with anywhere between 1 and 5 D-Class personnel. They may also receive social interaction sessions with employees of Goal 466, Wilson's Wildlife Solutions, that have Level 2 site-wide clearance. Sarah Gardner must always be given access, as she is bonded with SCP-3153-1. Anyone interested in participating in the social enrichment of SCP-3153 must first conduct and pass a psychological evaluation. This evaluation is intended to detect tendencies toward excessive emotional attachment, and candidates must be screened accordingly. Once someone has been approved,
Each socialization
Excessive emotional attachment? How does one define excessive emotional
session
attachment?
may go on for a maximum
Like
of 1 hour and
obsession?
is to be monitored closely by researchers who will watch for the biological and behavioral changes to SCP-3153 that are sure to manifest. Once these alterations appear, they must be recorded and registered for posterity in order to allow for a fuller understanding of SCP-3153's genetics. Civilians who come into contact with instances of SCP-3153 in the wild must be given Class B amnestics, and the instances they met must be recovered by Goal 466 and brought into containment. At first glance, SCP-3153 might seem horrifying, disgusting, and repellent to behold. But we should all know better than to judge a book by its cover. At their
Right.
core, these creatures seem to be gentle, friendly, loyal, and highly emotionally sensitive. All they want is to spend time with us. And why should they be denied that just because they look a bit different? In my opinion, they aren't so different from dogs, with a whole lot more legs. Dogs have been man's best friend for quite some time. But perhaps we could make room in our hearts for some new friends too, even if they look a little bit scary. Check out the Dr. Bob Patreon and
You know what? I didn't know what to feel like it at the beginning, but I would absolutely, totally
become a junior
accept
researcher
a
today.
pet.
Now go and watch another
Centipede
entry
like
from the
this.
files of Dr. Bob, like SCP-213, Antimatter Parasite.
The doors of
course.
the output
Dr. Bob's ever-increasing ability to just awesomely have
booth slide open, exhaling smoke
stuff.
as the researchers watch with rapt attention. The dial on the console in front of them is set to very fine. A human had stepped into the adjoining booth only minutes ago.
Oh.
A human would not step out. The researchers, feeling some strange, shapeless feeling of unease, asked two of the guards to approach the output booth. These same guards had mainly seen the researchers destroying wristwatches and torturing monkeys with this mysterious machine, so when
Yeah.
they approached the booth, the only thing they were expecting to see was a corpse. That's why they didn't even have their hands on their sidearms. That's why soon,
Always
both
have
of
your
them
hand on your
would be
sidearm.
dead. A figure emerged from the booth, human only in vague shape. Dark blue skin covered in luminous patches, long, sharp teeth, and a whipping tongue dripping with slime. Too tall, too many eyes. Before the guards can correct their deadly mistake, the monster heaves and vomits, spraying a firehouse spew of neon green vomit. It hits the two guards, who start screeching with pain,
Oh, not
screams
good.
that are almost drowned out by the deafening chemical hiss of the guards starting to melt. The researchers, tasked with investigating and containing anomalies, had just created a new one, and it was about to go on an all-out rampage. Alarms were sounded. A special response team was called in, heavily armed and heavily armored, to dispatch the beast, but it would not be an easy fight. The creature's acid vomit allows it to melt the door of the testing chamber and escape out into the hall, where it continues to wreak havoc. The members of the special response team open fire with high-caliber assault rifles, none of which seems to pierce the creature's discolored skin. It tears into them with deadly claws. It showers them with its
man.
corrosive puke. Before any of them
Right?
really know what's going on, 6 more of them are
Oh.
dead, and the Foundation is forced to call in additional support.
Yes,
It goes
just
on
tonight,
for
and then you
hours.
get
The
off
chase,
for the next few
chaos,
weeks,
The
right?
scientists screaming and running, hundreds of thousands of dollars in Foundation property dealing with corrosive damage. A total
Are you freaking serious? Who cares about the amount of dollar damage done to the freaking equipment? People are dying.
of 8 dead. So many people injured, and many of the ones who dealt directly with the creature were dealing with partial memory loss. How did they defeat the monster? Well, they didn't. After several hours of rampaging, the creature became unwell. It experienced trouble breathing, slowed down, and started to show symptoms of extreme pain. It collapsed to the ground and screamed a terrible scream before exploding into blue dust and smoke. The problem had taken care of itself.
Oh yeah. Foundation usually has some pretty steep benefits. But I don't think the benefits outweigh the risks, no matter how good
Not
the benefits
long ago,
are.
this terrible
You're always
beast
at
was
risk
a
of death.
28-year-old Caucasian man.
Excruciating death, I might add. Like, you are always at risk of being horrifically mutilated, killed, and it's horrifying.
A D-class, but otherwise a completely unremarkable human being, betraying no inherent anomalous qualities. Anything anomalous about him was imbued, not by some group of interest or unknowable eldritch god, but by the SCP Foundation itself, and a very special anomaly dubbed SCP-914. Today is a special case because a little-known fact about me is that SCP-914 is one of my 3 favorite anomalies. I'll let you guess the other 2 in the comments, but I can assure you that they have already been featured on the channel. 914, also known as the Clockworks, is a fascinating safe-class anomaly.
So he's already covered his 2 other favorite anomalies. That's interesting.
Anomaly held in Research Cell 109-B. The composition of the anomaly itself is relatively simple. 2 booths, an intake and output booth, connected by a vast series of clockwork mechanisms covering 18 square meters. Cogs, servos, screw drives, belts, pulleys, a mainspring. Despite having the anomaly in containment for decades under the watchful eye of the ever-professional Dr. Gears, the exact mechanisms of how the anomaly works have never been fully understood. The part of the anomaly you're most likely to interface with, if ever you're given Level 3 research clearance, is the selection panel. The panel has 5 settings. Each one will cause a different effect on whatever item, material, or individual is placed into the intake booth. I'll give you a quick rundown on the settings, but then we'll get to what we really came here for. Some of the most deranged test logs for any anomaly you've ever seen. The first of the 5 settings is rough. This will brutally annihilate whatever is placed into the intake booth.
Oh no.
For example, a kilogram of steel appeared to have been cut into chunks with a laser. A chimp placed into the intake booth on rough. Well, let's just say that animal rights activists would be justifiably unhappy with the results. Then there's coarse. This will also result in the disassembly of whatever is placed into the intake booth, but in a far more methodical fashion. A researcher's wristwatch was placed into the intake booth on course.
Appreciate about Dragon Ball.
What's that?
I'm over 130 episodes into the series, and they've never changed the opening sequence.
And it was found in the output booth, neatly divided into its component parts. The Foundation sadly did not reimburse him for the lost wristwatch, but if it was that important to him, he probably shouldn't have volunteered it for testing. Next is 1-to-1.
You can put it back together. The thing is, you could put that back together. All the components are there. You just have to take it to a watch guy. Like, go on Google, type in watch repair. Give the guy the parts, and he should be able to put it back together, right?
The result will be a roughly equivalent item or individual to the one placed in the intake booth. To take a rather cliche example, if you were to place a can of Pepsi Max into the intake booth, there's a good chance that you'll get a can of Diet Coke in the output booth. And in case you're wondering, yes, if a person is placed into the intake booth, a relatively similar person aside from slight superficial variations such as race, height, or weight will appear on the other side. Is this existentially horrifying? Absolutely, more on that later. Now things are going to get even stranger with the fine setting. When an item is placed into the intake booth on this setting, the item in the output booth will be a slightly improved version of the original, typically in a non-anomalous manner. Take, for example, a 9mm Beretta handgun, like the one I keep in the glove box of my Honda Civic. If this was placed into the clockwork...
Dr. Bob drives a Honda Civic. Why does that feel so appropriate? A Honda Civic. It feels so absolutely perfectly normal, and yes, that seems like the exact car Dr. Bob would drive is a Honda Civic.
You wouldn't get a laser gun or a gun that controls people's minds, but you might suddenly find yourself packing a Desert Eagle, a far more powerful handgun to say the least.
Oh,
Then there's very fine. This setting has, to say the
This is where the anomalies come in.
least, been problematic for members of the SCP Foundation. Put simply, the very fine setting imbues whatever is placed in the intake booth with a
That's probably why I feel like it's most appropriate for Dr. Bob. Bob is a very generic name. what's better for a guy with a generic name than a very generic car? Right? Bah.
Completely random and unpredictable anomalous effect. If you place a Tamagotchi, ask your parents' kids, into the intake booth and set it to very fine, it might come out self-aware and morbidly depressed. Or it might have the ability to make your head explode with its mind if you forget to feed it. And if you place a D-class into the intake booth, you might get the acid-spewing, bulletproof abomination that we saw in the opening. Yes,
Right.
that really did happen, and it's the reason why Dr. Gears put level 3 clearance on any attempts to test biological material in the Clockworks. That's everything you need to know in order to have a functioning knowledge of the Clockworks. And now, we can get into the fun stuff. There are extensive test logs for the Clockworks, and I've
Of course
personally
there is.
selected some of the most deranged and bizarre tests from these logs for your viewing pleasure. And to remind you to proceed with caution if ever you find yourself granted access to testing for SCP-914. It's time to set the video's quality to very fine and proceed. In a test by Dr. Grangan, 5 different human corpses were placed into the Clockworks to test the different settings. You can probably guess the first 5, but the setting on very fine resulted in the corpse becoming a pile of green slime. This slime was incredibly
What?
similar both chemically and structurally to SCP-447, an anomaly that should never, ever, ever, under any circumstances ever, come into contact with dead bodies, for reasons you're not cleared to understand. After this, Dr. Gears forbade the testing of dead bodies in the Clockworks going forward.
Yeah, it's apparently, it looks like it's a amorphous blob of green goo that brings dead bodies back to
That
life.
would not,
A
however,
zombie.
mean that other incredibly strange other things wouldn't be tested. A researcher whose name is now redacted decided to test some tuna sandwiches in the Clockworks.
Oh, boy.
Perhaps he wasn't particularly good at making sandwiches and hoped the Clockworks would give him a hand on that front. On 1-to-1, it became a salmon sandwich on rye. On fine, it became a far higher quality tuna sandwich with softer bread and more flavorful and vitamin-rich tuna. And on very fine, it became a loaf of bread shaped like a realistic fish. When the door to the output booth opened, the fish swam away through the air. Nobody knows where it is now, though I will say researcher Jones was seen with crumbs on her lab coat afterwards, which may give some clues as to where the anomalous breadfish ended up.
Oh no, poor breadfish.
The next test was so serious that it required approval from the O5 Council, the very top echelon of Foundation Command.
Oh,
That approval
what?
was granted, and several samples of SCP-939, the nightmarish creature's codename With Many Voices, were requisitioned for testing. On rough and coarse, the creatures were completely obliterated, and on 1-to-1, the results were redacted. But the truly frightening things occurred when the anomalies were put into the input booth on fine and very fine. On fine, the creature seemed physically intact, but respiration and vital signs had ceased. The creature was dead. On very fine, the creature was reduced to a pile of smoldering white ash. According to the perspective of SCP-914, it seems that the ideal state of existence for SCP-939 is being dead or even completely destroyed. I'll leave you to unpack the implications of that. Moving on. Dr. Falconis decided
Yeah.
to test a copy of the biography Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson. On 1-to-1,
Really?
the result was a biography entitled Bill Gates, also by Isaacson, detailing the life and times of the Microsoft founder. On fine, it produced a DVD of Steve Jobs narrating his autobiography. On very fine,
Okay.
the result was a metallic cube. When a button on the cube was pressed,
Curious.
it activated a small hologram of deceased Apple founder Steve Jobs, who appeared to be sapient and able to answer any questions about the real-life late CEO's life. Dr. Curtis, an office joker, decided to get extra weird with it. He included a pack of bacon and a photo of the infamous anomaly SCP-682, the hard-to-kill reptile. This was already on the odder side of the scale. We don't even know how he came up with that, but the result was even stranger. On very fine,
Okay.
the result was a tiny version of SCP-682 made of cooked bacon. Much
Oh.
like the larger, non-bacon version of SCP-682, it was extremely violent and aggressive, but had a pleasing smell, and instead of roaring, it made the sound of sizzling bacon. Dr. Curtis suggested classifying the anomaly as SCP-682-BAC, a suggestion that was rejected by Foundation higher-ups. We're not sure what happened to the little bacon SCP-682, but personally I suspect it might be another victim of researcher Jones' almost anomalous appetite. Dr. Gears left a note on the testing log saying, "Very funny, Dr. Curtis. You are suspended from testing SCP-914 until further notice. Though I have to admit,
Damn.
it smelled delicious." Dr. Greer decided to test a canister of Fox Labs White Lightning pepper spray, which, upon being placed in the intake booth on Very Fine, became a chili pepper. When tested,
Chili pepper?
this chili pepper had a Scoville heat rating of over 300 million, making it by far the
Damn.
hottest chili pepper on Earth. Dr. Clef's suggestion to donate it to Hot Ones was denied. Dr. Armand and Agent
damn it,
McKnight,
Clef.
a duo of huge fans of the Lord of the Rings trilogy by J.R.R. Tolkien, donated a series of their copies for testing. Predictably, Ruff and Horst destroyed the books. On 1-to-1,
course.
the Lord of the Rings compendium book was separated into the 3 smaller books that comprise the trilogy: The Fellowship
Okay,
of the
that
Ring,
makes sense.
The Two Towers, and The Return of the King. On Fine, things started to get particularly exciting for any devoted Lord of the Rings obsessive. The book became a copy of the One Ring, the famous mystical item from the novels created by the Dark Lord Sauron to seek domination of Middle-earth. The ring was made out of paper, inscribed with a book-accurate poem in the Black Speech and the ability to resize to the wearer's finger. On Very Fine, it became a different, shorter book entitled A New Shadow, with a plot centered around a boy called Eldarion. Tolkien scholars would be quick to point out that this was the title of a scrapped story that Tolkien intended to write. Agent McKnight appended a frantic note to the study saying, "You can have the ring, Armand, but I want the book. I'm going to copy this thing. Any Tolkien fans want to read it?" This would not be the only time a classic nerd would use SCP-914 to live out certain pop culture fantasies, but the next time it happened would carry considerably more severe consequences.
Yeah, I would imagine.
As researcher Mason brought in his collection of LEGO Star Wars X-Wing fighters from home. The tests
boy.
on most of these were predictable, until of course it was put on the Very Fine setting, where things got considerably more chaotic. As you might have guessed, it became a real and functional miniature X-Wing fighter. When the output booth was opened, it flew out and began attacking, using its tiny laser cannons to kill several members of personnel. It managed to dodge and weave around all attempts to stop it before escaping the Foundation entirely. Its current whereabouts are unknown, so if you see a tiny Lego X-Wing flying around, I'd advise you to duck and cover. Next, Dr. Dextrania submitted a
Duck and
Beretta
cover.
M9 handgun for testing on Very Fine. While the gun appeared normal, when fired, its bullets detected the nearest form of life and honed in on them. This had disastrous results, as the bullet weaved towards the nearest security guard and immediately killed him. Strangely,
damn.
the cause of death was not trauma caused by the bullet, but by cardiac arrest. Dr. Dextrania appended a note to this study, reading, "I'm not sure if the bullets should be used as actual ammunition, as they pose a huge threat to other personnel. I'm requesting that testing of bullets on Very Fine is prohibited." A member of the O5 Council approved this request. Researcher L. Inselman decided to get controversial and brought in a copy of Mein Kampf, the
Why? What? For what purpose?
infamous book by Nazi dictator Adolf Hitler. On Very Fine, the book became a tiny origami caricature of Hitler himself, which would awkwardly goose-step around shouting taunts and boasts. After the creation of Tiny Paper Hitler, the site director gave a mandate that staff members can kick him around in order to relieve stress. For the record, I
Great.
wholeheartedly approve. Dr. Rodriguez put a full DVD box set of the American television sitcom The Office into the Clockworks and set the device to Fine, at which point it produced a mosaic portrait of the character Dwight Schrute, played by actor Rainn Wilson, made out of fragments of the DVDs. Researcher Blaze
that's
brought
nice.
in 2 pairs of UV protecting sunglasses for testing on both Rough and 1-to-1, both of which, strangely, had anomalous effects on the glasses. The glasses on Rough
Really?
became a small pane of glass, but when this pane of glass is looked through in the direction of a light source, the observer will experience severe hallucinations. These include seeing dragons roiling in smoke, birds with blue flaming wings and horns like a goat, and a deer with enormous antlers and, quote, crazy floating orbs. Researchers have conducted further tests on whether these anomalous effects have any connections to the incredibly powerful and highly dangerous SCP-2845. The other pair of sunglasses that researcher Blaze put through the Clockworks on Fine also had peculiar results, but in a very different fashion. they became mirrored aviator-style shades that had a mimetic effect on viewers, where they felt compelled to comment on how stylish and hip they looked. A beautiful statement piece to complete any summer look you might have in mind. Researcher Blaze noted, "Definitely the most sexy pair of sunglasses I've ever seen in my life. I have to keep them if I'm ever going to get a date." Their supervisor, Dr. Veritas, replied, "Sure, Blaze, of course I'm going to let you keep an anomalous object for your personal gain. I stored it in the anomalous item wing for study. Don't ask where, I'm not telling you." The unprofessional nature of Researcher Blaze's conduct was nothing compared to the trouble that Researcher Wood got into for trying to test a vial of corrosive slime extracted from SCP-106. When he attempted to conduct the test, guards wrestled him away and detained him. After evaluation from site directors, he was transferred off-site for safety reasons.
Good.
The SCP Foundation really didn't need another SCP-106 to worry about. Researchers misusing and abusing the clockworks is a bit of a running theme, as we also discovered with junior researcher Summers. She claimed to be testing a hair clip on Fine, but in the decisive moment, she instead stepped into the intake booth herself, defying all ethical standards. When she emerged from the output booth, she had clearer skin, longer hair, and a better figure. This did not help her when she was immediately apprehended by Foundation guards in the aftermath. Dr. Veritas said in the aftermath, "She told us she just wanted to try with her hair clip. By the time we realized what she was actually doing, it was too late to stop her. Needless to say, she's since been terminated, and I hope I don't need to tell you all to not do it again." Researcher Westron decided to bring the ambition back down to sensible levels. He put 50 small glass jars full of strawberry jello into the intake booth and set the dial to very fine. The result was an intricate glass jar shaped like a human skull, filled with the same strawberry jello. The skull's lower jaw moved and vocalized the word "squish" before never moving or speaking again. Dr. G, a researcher who also had a sideline performing as a gangster rapper in the mid-90s, decided to test a full Santa suit on the one-to-one feature. The result? An outfit where the red and white color values were shifted. Afterwards, Dr. G was heard grumbling, "Dang it, I was hoping for a Grinch suit." Dr. Lloyd, another researcher,
How would that be similar? I feel like the Grinch is like the polar opposite of Santa almost.
took a cement lion statue from his front yard and decided to bring it in for testing, anticipating that putting it through on Very Fine would probably result in a rampaging stone lion running around the containment site, so he instead decided to play it safe and test it on one-to-one. The result was not what he expected. It became an exact copy of SCP-173, the sculpture. While it would later come to light that the sculpture was not anomalous like the true SCP-173, upon initially seeing it, Dr. Lloyd did have a panic attack. This is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to test results.
Okay, alright. So I think the Clockworks has got a bit of a sense of humor.
For the Clockworks. And perhaps, if there's sufficient enthusiasm in the comments, we'll do some more someday. One needs to be careful when dealing with the seductive nature of the Clockworks and its offer of quick improvements. You may just end up getting a lot more than you bargained for. Check out the Dr. Bob Patreon and become a junior researcher today. Now go and watch another entry from the files of Dr. Bob, like SCP-2450. Teeth. The woman stared.
It does make me wonder, what do you think would happen if you put something like a scarf or a sweater in there? Like on one-to-one. Would you get a similar thing? Like, would you, if you put a sweater in there, would you get a different sweater?
In horror at her coworker's face as the features dribble and sluice off of what was once his head.
Sloth.
He hasn't been injected with acid or doused with some anomalous solution. All he's done is opened the office curtains and let the sun in. She, along with everyone else at the office, steps away from the ray of light consuming her coworker. He's melting like a lit candle on fast forward, his screams turning to bubbling gurgles. The woman can scarcely believe what she's seeing, but she has to. It's the only way she can survive. What happens next is a blur. The sun passes overhead as light expands across the office floor. Everyone caught in the beams starts to spasm, racked by some unknowable feeling. At first, they seem sweaty and moist like wet clay. Then, the dribbling starts. Ice cream skin cascading over wet clothes, burbling.
Yeah, this is a really fucked up one. one of the end of the world scenarios that they have down at the SCP Foundation when day breaks. Essentially, the sun turns evil.
Pulling down to a soggy
How?
puddle.
Why?
Everyone
Don't
else
know.
panics, but the woman thinks fast. Perhaps acting on some animal instinct, she ducks behind an adjoining wall, out of the rapidly advancing natural light. She dodges it by a fraction of a second, as so many of her coworkers are instantaneously dissolved. 20 minutes ago, she was filling in spreadsheets and preparing the quarterly earnings report for the company meeting. Now, most of the people attending that meeting are, as far as she knows, dead.
Not
She'll
dead.
soon find out that the truth is so much worse. But there'll be time for that later. Nobody moves for an hour. The dead remain inert blobs of gelatinous goo on the ground, and the living hide, some weeping, some catatonic. The woman, in survival mode, is drinking it all in, trying to piece together the details and find some narrative in all of this. It's the sun. It's something to do with the sun. Or is it some kind of airborne agent? Or AI-driven nanovirus? She just doesn't have enough information to go off of. Little does she know, this is just one domino falling in a catastrophe of global proportions.
Yep.
In the White House, the government is debating tax reform, balancing the budget, and considering whether the Pentagon vending machines should stock Coke, Pepsi, or both. The president is signing bills when the light shifting through the Oval Office window seems to change somehow. He doesn't even notice it's happening until he sees something strange dripping onto the paper of the latest bill. Something about funding for some new interstate transport project. What's dripping onto the paper is his face. Struck by an
Oh, that
incredible
doesn't look
tiredness,
good.
the president leans
That's
forward
bad.
and washes over the desk. Someone in the Secret Service might have sounded the alarm if any of them were still solid enough to do so. The same happens to countless other world leaders at the same time. Canada, Australia, Mexico, the whole northern hemisphere gets it at once. It's happening in the streets and supermarkets at the same time, where the light is destroying, transforming. The linoleum and the concrete outside become stained by once human blobs in equal measure. One particularly striking image is a pair of boots with clothes crumpled around them. In front of the boots sits a baby's stroller, empty, save for the stains. The light takes all in equal measure. Hikers
That's
become
sad.
flesh-colored splatters on distant walkways. Window washers on their adjustable platforms stain the very windows they were trying to clean, as the liquid that was once the people on the other side washes up against them. Every person waiting to cross the road at the street corner soon finds their way draining into the gutter. Every freelancer stepping outside their homes to take in a lungful of fresh air between shifts soon find themselves soaking into the grass. People liquefy at the Leaning Tower of Pisa, drip through the grates in the floor of the Eiffel Tower walkways. Tourists melt on the Great Wall of China, lose physical form on the cobblestones of Moscow's Red Square, staring at the pyramids of Giza, sitting outside of cafes in Poland, and exploring the waterways of the Amazon rainforest. In distant, war-torn countries, combatants wielding AK-47s and grenades freeze up as the change seizes them. The guns and bombs fall from their hands as their hands become little more than wet slime, along with the rest of them. Within moments, the battle has become eerily quiet. Wet army fatigues lay in the mud.
There can't be a battle if there's nobody to fight.
Soaked with the goo that had once been their wearers. The world has achieved peace once and for all, at the most terrible of costs. We return to the woman, crouching, terrified, ignorant to the magnitude of the horror that's just laid across the world. That's when the broadcast starts. Every screen in the office changes, displaying some unfamiliar logo. A voice comes over the speakers, calling himself the Administrator. He works for a group called the SCP Foundation, the one group capable of stopping this, or so they claimed. The so-called Administrator told the remaining members of the office who still had bodily integrity what they knew so far. Sunlight had somehow become dangerous. Being exposed to it caused an instant and irrevocable transformation. Those exposed should be considered lost. The Administrator recommends waiting until night and then traveling to one of the addresses they recommend, an SCP Foundation containment site. It doesn't feel real. None of this feels real. The message just keeps playing on repeat until it all just feels like white noise to the woman. She can't afford to think about what could be the apocalypse. She's not worried about the world. She's not worried about the office. She's not even worrying about herself. No, she's worrying about her wife. She's halfway across the country on a business trip, some stupid wilderness retreat, 2,000 miles away. Did the sun get her like it got everybody else? No, that can't be. Her wife is too smart for that. She's got to be. As the survivors in her office huddle in the dark, the woman pulls out her phone and frantically scrolls through her contacts. One tortuously long dial later, she's through, and the voice of her wife washes over her like liquid silk. She's never been more relieved. When the chaos unfolded, she was in a hot yoga sauna tent, safely out of the sun's new and deadly glare. Plenty of others on the trip hadn't been so lucky, but they couldn't afford to worry about it now. When the change happened, they all received texts from the same SCP Foundation that had been broadcasting over the computers. One goal was clear amongst it all. They needed to reunite at the last gasp of the world. Maybe everything would be okay if they could. But how? They couldn't drive. Even if they set off at night, the roads were gridlocked, full of cars where their drivers had cooked in their seats. They couldn't fly. As soon as the chaos started unfolding, planes started falling from the sky, destroying buildings and population centers below as their pilots took on a liquid state.
Yeah.
Inevitably, the internet would go out without anyone to maintain it. So too would the power, critical infrastructure, the rule of law, everything. In the space of a few hours, the whole world felt like it was melting. Perhaps they could find their ways to the nearest SCP Foundation containment site, but then they'd be so separate. No, it was better to be in danger together than safe alone. The woman hardened her resolve. Somehow, she would get back to her beloved, or she would die trying. Or
Damn.
worse. Before she hangs up the phone, she says, "Stay safe. Please. We'll meet at our special place and everything will be okay again." Fast forward a week. She's trekking across an abandoned highway, weaving between abandoned cars. It's a cold, moonless night, the only kind that's even remotely safe. The woman has seen terrible and impossible things in these prior few days. In some cases, even moonlight could kill. She couldn't risk it. That explains her current outfit. She planned it extensively, a mix of items she already owned and other parts she'd looted from stores along the way. On the bottom layer, she wore a full-body wetsuit with Under Armour layers on top of that. She wore a long, black rain slicker with thick boots and gloves. Over her head, a balaclava and a pair of mirrored shades. By her calculation, not a single speck of light could reach her skin. That's all it would take to destroy it all, and she wasn't about to let her wife down like that. Not while she still drew breath.
Damn.
Every day, there were new broadcasts from the mysterious SCP Foundation, reaching every machine that was still able to receive them. Each one seemed to take on a greater tone of desperation than the previous, all imploring her and the other civilians to make their way to the nearest containment site. But lately, they'd been providing stranger suggestions too. In the previous broadcast, they'd even recommended, in the absence of viable food, that civilians eat parts of the blobs that were once their fellow human beings, as long as the pieces are small enough to avoid choking. The woman thinks that she'd rather
Nasty.
starve than lower herself to that, but who knows what desperation would drive her to. She hikes ceaselessly, the contents of her rucksack shaking. It felt so heavy when she first set off, but as the days passed, she got used to it. It's mostly survival gear, spare clothes, emergency layers, a bedroll, a tent she could set up if there wasn't any natural cover when the sun came up. There's plenty of energy drinks in there too. It's the best
That's
way
not
to help her
healthy.
remain in command of her circadian rhythm. The alternative is becoming like one of those poor souls in the cars. As much as her instincts around respect and human dignity want her to avert her eyes, she can't help but look in and see the bloodless carnage. Lone drivers, sometimes whole families, all reduced to inert, melted slop inside their vehicles. They probably all thought they were on a normal road trip, or thinking about what they'll have for dinner after their commute. She shakes her
Yeah.
head in disgust and keeps moving. She won't turn out like them. She can't turn out like them. The woman keeps walking, focused only on putting in as many miles as she can before having to find a place inside to hide before daylight. It's funny. Once upon a time, she'd been so scared of the dark. Now, it's one of the only times she feels remotely safe. That is, until she hears something shifting behind her. Without thinking, she turns and sees dark shapes moving in the cars she just watched.
That's the other thing about this. The blobs are not completely inert. They're alive. I'll be right back. Have a good day at work. Yes, I'll see you in the morning too, hon. What are those chickens doing?
Walked past. Were people sleeping in there? Animals, perhaps? No. The truth is far, far worse than that. The woman soon realizes that she's seeing the blobs themselves moving inside the cars. Wait,
Yep.
does this mean they aren't even dead? She watches, frozen in horror from the implications of everything she's seeing. The blobs rise up, smashing themselves up against the windows of their cars until the glass cracks and then gives way entirely. She sees the blobs slithering out of the cars and ambulating down onto the ground, leaving wet trails like giant, grotesque slugs. Then, they begin to talk. One of the blobs, the closest one to her, hisses and gurgles words that sound eerily like those of an innocent little boy with an edge of terrible madness as it begins wriggling slowly in her direction.
Hey, are you my mommy? Ha ha. Look, mommy's trying to run away from us. Doesn't she look so funny? You look sick, mommy. You look so pale. We need to help you get some sun, mommy.
The gelatinous creature lunges for the woman, several tendril-like pseudopods reaching out of its fleshy mass to embrace her. Her reflexes save her in the nick of time, but the beast doesn't let up after that. It keeps slithering, keeps grabbing. It's like something out of her worst nightmare. She drops her backpack to the ground, but it only weigh her down and get her killed, and runs for her
Awful.
life as the monsters chase her. For creatures without legs, they move with such nightmarish speed. All she can do is sprint until her lungs burn, until it feels like her muscles are pumping razor blades, but the alternative is more awful than she can even imagine. As she runs, more of the monsters in the cars wake up, the blobs that had once been the grand majority of the human race, and they wanted the remaining survivors to join them in their new, terrible fate. The woman
Horrible.
manages to lose them, only just, but she hears their gibbering madness ring out into the night behind her.
We'll find you, mommy. We'll find you, and we'll help you see the light.
Dark months pass in a cold, cruel world. The woman can never stop moving. The second you stop moving, you die. Those things, the blobs, the formerly human monsters, were so much smarter than she'd first thought. They're single-minded creatures, living to hunt down unchanged humans and drag them into the light. At night, she sleeps in closets, a place where she thought she'd never return to. It's murder on her back, sleeping semi-upright, but those who sleep unsecured don't survive for long. She hears them screaming in the night sometimes, when the fleshy tendrils take hold of them and drag them out. Better them than her, she thinks. These months have made her crueler than she ever remembered being. Maybe that's what's required in the new world just to get by. She passes from town to town, city to city. The miles melt away beneath her booted feet. Her wife is out there somewhere. She'll do anything she can to get to her. No
At
matter
this
how
point,
many
I think
terrible
her wife
horrors
is
she
probably a
sees.
part of one of these
One night,
blobs.
she witnesses something so much worse than she'd ever seen before. She was sleeping on one of the upper floors of the high-rise when the ground beneath her started rumbling. She woke up immediately, terrified that, for some reason, the building itself was going to collapse around her. She ran out of the closet she was hiding in and looked out of the window onto the dark street below. An immense shape was moving, a giant blob, so big it would dwarf a city bus. Even in the dark, she can see the parts, the arms, the legs, the faces, both human and animal. It's an amalgamation, some twisted hybrid of hundreds, if not thousands, of those corrupted beings. They're joining together, she thinks, her brain injected with a sudden rush of pure horror. They're becoming superorganisms, and they're still hunting. They won't stop until they have everyone. Flash forward again. She's been traveling for so many months when she reaches the place where they agreed to meet. Her wife. She hadn't been replying to calls or texts, but perhaps that's because the whole networks are down. It's so hard to tell anymore. In most places, not even any electricity works. But that doesn't matter. She keeps walking. It's an old movie theater. They were here so many years ago, back when they first met and saw their first movie, The Handmaiden, directed by Park Chan-wook. So many happy memories. And wouldn't the darkness of the movie theater be the perfect place to avoid the sun? She creeps down the hall, looking for screen 3, the screen they'd agreed on, their special screen. The woman wears a mad grin of anticipation on her face, her sanity bearing the weight of all the terrible things she's seen. She opens the door and sees her, the thing that had once been her wife.
Honey, I'm so glad you're here.
She says, in a low, wet voice.
I knew
SCP-001 is the ultimate nightmare situation, codenamed When Day Breaks. An XK-class end-of-the-world scenario, irreparably altering the state of things and throwing not only the human race, but all of life on Earth into seemingly irreparable disarray.
Well, I think that's it for tonight. We leave on possibly one of the most depressing notes I've ever left on, ever. When day breaks. I thank you all for joining me here tonight and hanging out with me. I do apologize if that was a bit of a bummer ending. But that's how it is sometimes. And especially when we're dealing with anomalous situations and things. Good night, everybody. Thank you all for joining me here tonight. It was sad. But I promise Tuesday's video is going to be a lot less sad. I'll catch you all on Tuesday. I'll catch you on the flip-flop. Stay out of traffic. Stay out of car engine compartments. Stay awesome, possums, and stay hydrated. Love you all.